I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
You're listening to Deep Cut.
That is true.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Here we are at our third and final, for now, episode on Malian and Mauritanian director Abderrahmane Sissako. In our episodes on Timbuktu, the popular pick from Sissako's filmography, and our episode on Bamako, Wilson's deep cut pick, we talked about how Sissako imbues high concept but clear political allegory with an almost anthropological, patient, slice-of-life rhythm and visual style. I don't know about you guys, but he's shaping up to be one of my favorite directors for sure.
I would have to agree with you, Eli. You bringing him on the podcast has really allowed me to, I feel like, really deeply appreciate this man's filmography. And I think us covering all four of his released feature films is like a testament to that, right? We've never covered a director's full filmography before. I don't know. It sort of just came about that we are ending up talking about all four of his films. And I think it's just so beautiful how naturally that came to be. I don't know. It's for a director that's like really majorly underseen and from not even a filmmaking country, a filmmaking continent that really is just beginning to grow and doesn't have a strong film history. I think there's just so many things that makes this director and his films so special to me, and also just I feel like just in general world cinema. And I feel very happy and grateful that it just all ended up being this way, and we had the chance for multiple episodes to talk about this man and his work.
Totally agreed. Yeah. It's exactly what you said, that he's a very special director. There's just something about how he knows where to put the camera, how he knows how to create real calm. I think for me, that's really important. I'm also glad that we're using Deep Cut to hopefully shine more of a light on his work, because it's way underseen. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is how these two movies for today are in dire need of a restoration. Today we're talking about Life on Earth from 1998 and Waiting for Happiness from 2002, which are his first two full fiction feature movies. When I was researching more about these movies for this episode, I had a lot of trouble finding his first feature, Life on Earth, at all. I was lucky to catch a screening of it through the African Film Festival this year in New York, digitally.
Was that a DCP?
No.
It's like a stream.
It was a stream, and it was about as high quality as we have here.
No, that's sucked.
How much did you pay for
really
that?
Sucked. Maybe like $8, $10. I don't remember.
Okay.
Wilson dug up that file again from within the bowels of the internet. I fell in love with that little movie. It's about a man played by Sissako himself who has been living and studying in France and decides to go home to his father in a village in Mali and just observes daily life there. It's very simple, it's very kind, and I think it's very alive. Wilson suggested we loop in Sissako's second feature, Waiting for Happiness, which is a similarly rhythm of life, slice of life collection of moments in the lives of people living in a Mauritanian village, some as observed by Abdullah, a 17-year-old who doesn't speak the local language and is visiting his mother before going to study in Europe. In that way, Abderrahmane Sissako is the first director whose entire fictional filmography we'll have covered. Woo woo.
Yeah.
Today we're going to uncover the ways in which these first two features both show Sissako's tendencies and interests early on, before his later movies, which we've already discussed, and stand distinctly from his subsequent two features.
Sweet.
We've mostly covered Sissako's biography, but I've held on to some important gems for this episode because they inform these movies especially, and they also cast Timbuktu and Bamako in a new light, in my opinion. We've talked about why Sissako became a filmmaker, but here's the thing. He offers different explanations in different interviews.
Yeah, he does.
And this one felt important to me. This is from that same African Film Festival interview from the early to mid 2000s that we've talked about in other episodes. He says, quote, "If I try to explain the decision I made one day to become a filmmaker, I must go back to that period in my life where I felt at a loss. I had lost my bearings. Bambara, my language, gone. No more Malian childhood friends. So I became more observant, more aware of what surrounded me, and I developed a keener sense of the importance of gestures and body language. And I wanted to tell that story." End quote.
To counter you, Eli, I have another story. Well, not really to counter, because I guess it does paint a similar picture, but from the Valerie Oussouf documentary, I scrubbed through a bit of that again, just to get a little more information, not on Life on Earth, but for Waiting for Happiness, because I know that was not that much written about it. He tells this story in this documentary about the most important year in his life, where he sort of felt like he owed his mother the chance of being a good son, because, long story, his mother's first son from her first marriage was taken away from her by the father of her son. And he felt a little guilty and wanted to be the son that was there for her. So he moved to Mauritania to live with his mom in a room that she rented in a court. The room that they rented in the court had a low window in the room that looked out into, I guess, the entrance or the courtyard.
That sounds familiar.
It sounds very familiar. He spent 1 year there. He didn't speak the language. He felt very alienated from a lot of the people around him. But he says, I'm going to quote him when he says this, because I typed it out. I typed the whole quote out. It's a short quote. But he says, quote, "Slowly, this window," talking about the low window, "this window really opened up in front of me. I understood that cinema was something that I wanted to do. Through that low window, he saw the world. And he decided to become a filmmaker." So it really does piggyback off of his quote from your interview, but I think the way that he paints it, this time where he felt really alienated, where he had no Malian friends, where his language was gone, was that exact time where he was in Mauritania, the split between two cultures. I'm very happy that we're talking about both movies today, because you have a director that even pre-moving to Europe and Russia and going to film school there already split between two cultures. There's already a director, a person that is having an identity crisis there.
Yeah.
And you see it through these two movies. He's just working on both sides.
I'm so glad that we are talking about these two movies last, because they feel like the keystone or the core of what he really cares about, which is, how do you find yourself without a firm sense of home? And where do you look to find yourself?
Yeah.
That is a great find of a quotation. Thank you, Wilson.
No problem.
Let's continue going in reverse chronological order and talk about Waiting for Happiness.
Yes.
Which, Wilson, I know you prefer of the two movies.
Well, on my first watch, Waiting for Happiness was the very first Sissako film that I had seen. It was my introduction to Sissako. And
Before Timbuktu?
I guess, no, not really.
Busted.
Wilson? Busted.
We got him.
Telling lies. Put him in podcast jail. This year, Waiting for Happiness was my introduction to Sissako's filmography. It's someone who has felt distant from his films for a while. I was still trying to get my head around how to approach a Sissako movie. Its beauty and its meaning and the emotions behind everything was sort of caught with a desire to really understand everything that was going on. And a lot goes on without being explicitly explained to you. And a lot of the first watch that I had was me just trying to connect dots. Because I'm like, oh, okay, why are we showing this shoe now? Or what is this person doing here? What's the meaning of it? But as I ventured further into Sissako's filmography, I guess it became clear to me that the people in his films tell a story about the place. And that story is the story that he wants you to feel, to get. On second watch, Waiting for Happiness, I guess alongside Bamako, have the strongest sense of trying to get you to understand something about this place.
Yeah.
That place in Waiting for Happiness being Nouakchott in Mauritania, it being a very strong, like, cry or whimper where you sort of see I did talk about this last episode, this slow death of a place. Waiting for Happiness really, it's like sort of like waiting for Godot. You're like waiting for a person, the thing that's never going to show up, which is happiness. There's so many things being talked about in this film, being like mentioned at, like immigration, leaving this place. And if I don't leave, like Mata says, I'm not going to leave this place. So then what ends up happening is he dies there. It's really sad and poetic and beautiful how Sissako is also on another level able to construct these images and these scenes that stick in your head and really like stay with you in an iconic sort of way, but also in a larger meaning sort of way as well. I think it's just a really like stroke of luck, this movie. Yeah, but I do think it is very hard to grasp, or just if you're searching for a really strong understanding of the plot, you're gonna have to work very hard. I will say that.
Is this where I come in and talk about how I don't know about these films in general? My general reaction to actually both films, and they are quite similar in terms of their sensibilities.
Yes.
Is that I don't know if Sissako's films are films that I generally want to watch, although I admit that they have some really beautiful moments. But as films, I don't know how to really judge them or to like talk about them, because they're not the kind of thing that I expect or are looking for, which is just to say that Sisako's films are not really right now anyway for me. Not that they need to be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I admire them because they are so kind of out of step with the rest of cinema, which is really interesting. I'm sure we can find films that have similar sensibilities, that kind of low key that you mentioned, Eli. Yeah, I think he doesn't really help you in terms of giving you very, very little plot, and even that little plot he doesn't explain. Like in Waiting for Happiness, one of the questions I had was just what is the relationship between Mata and Kathra? He doesn't really want to make it clear, which I also am like, that's okay. I don't think I really need to know.
Yeah.
But he leaves so many questions on the table plot-wise. They are such meditative films, and what they're meditating on is not necessarily explicit. It's quite difficult to speak about these things because we talked about this last week, where he has an anthropological kind of approach.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing about anthropology is that is not necessarily interested in what is entertaining. It is interested in what is there. And so these films have this feeling of this is there. And so you have a lot of stuff that feels extraneous, not necessarily interesting, random almost. I don't know how to take them, because it's just kind of, this is the style, this is the approach to the place and the material. And it is beautiful and it can be interesting. Yeah, so I mean, this is just me saying I feel ill-equipped to talk about and appreciate these films. But I will say, like, something that sticks out to me is this thing about the window in Waiting for Happiness. Somehow, this feeling that the window is like a television sprang forth in my mind. And that is exactly kind of connected to that quote that you had,
Maybe
Wilson.
you are on the same wavelength
I don't know.
Sissako, Ben. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah. It feels like the kind of film that you watch later in life, if that makes sense. Although I am older than both of you.
It's very reflective. And I think you're right, Ben, that there is a sort of sense of what is there and what do these characters observe. I'm realizing also, based on what you're saying, that part of the reason why I love these two movies so much, and probably above the other two Sissako that we've discussed, is that when I was a kid, I loved to take a camera on family vacations and just film my family members going about the vacation. And I would make like really a too long, but like a 20 to 30 minute little collage of what happened and just trying to find interesting moments and compositions. And I think Sissako goes about these two movies in a similar fashion, where he's very observational. He's very almost quizzical and curious and just wants to show you, yeah, Ben, what's there. I really enjoy that. It is almost Wiseman-y in a sense.
Hey, there's that link.
We got there.
It's strange to me because I don't know why it's changed, but I used to be the kind of person that enjoyed films more that way.
I thought you were like gonna just stop after film. I thought you used to be a person who enjoyed films.
Hilarious. But I don't know what has changed in the way that I personally watch films, that like something like this has kind of felt lacking to me, like in terms of what I'm looking for. I don't know. I feel like when you get older, you become more of a hard ass.
We're getting too old for
and your
this.
brain doesn't like want to accept things anymore. I think it's just my age.
No.
You know, Ben, you know how in our Wong Kar-wai series you did both Wilson and I and like summed up what we enjoy about
Do me, Eli.
About
me
cinema? Yeah. Too bad.
I think what you're saying now is crystallizing my understanding of your movie-going preferences. Because before this episode, I would have said, oh, I think Ben is really going to like Waiting for Happiness. It is simple, yet emotional. But I think there's another element. I think you like things that have a point and say it directly and
are clear about it. Yeah.
And do it with art and panache.
I think that makes sense. I feel like when I look at films, I'm searching for meaning, and these films are not searching for meaning, not that needs to happen, right?
Right.
Sissako in interviews talks about how he doesn't want to convince the audience of a point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more about convincing himself of a point. He says directly in one quote, I portray people nobody else would portray, but my intention is not to give them a voice, not to speak up for them, but to convince myself of the necessary frailty of human life, end quote. And that's not so thematic or argumentative in approach.
No.
It's more a quest. I like that open-endedness.
I do too. Like we do talk about like a lot of like the naturalism in his films, and I guess like shooting life as it is, but I do think that a lot more is constructed than we think.
Especially in Waiting for Happiness.
Yes, especially in Waiting for Happiness, for Sissako's ability to, I guess, convey a mood or anything. Like, I think that in Waiting for Happiness, like the body that washes on shore, like the way that Mata sort of sacrifices himself in order to get this light bulb to work, basically.
Oh.
Not really sacrificing himself, but...
Is that what's happening? I did not understand how he died.
I didn't think about it like that. That's a really interesting interpretation.
My interpretation of it is he was trying to complete the job that was Abdella's house that he couldn't figure out how to get electricity to. It wasn't working.
Oh.
I can't.
He collapses and can't finish the job. And Katra comes to him and tries to get him to wake up, and when he realizes that Mata is no longer there, he takes the light bulb himself that is lit, and he brings it to the compound and he screws it in. Oh, he buys the jumpsuit first, and then he goes and he fixes it. He buys his superhero costume.
Katra's got drip.
Yeah. I want to bring up a quote that he says about the fragility of life that he wanted to explore in this film.
Please.
He first says that he says something along the lines of, I don't have the right to speak for a country that I only feel partially belonging to. And he also says Africa never speaks for itself, but he describes Waiting for Happiness. He says, it was almost a whisper because I didn't want to shout. Shouting would be almost shameful.
That's really, yeah.
He talks about using this movie to speak low about something, but the approach is to say it quietly. And I think that is a perfect response your takeaway from the film, Ben? He knows what he's trying to do, and he's just, it's a different wavelength.
Yeah, I mean, even when I'm thinking about this, and I said this about Bamako as well, where I thought that Bamako was something that's really interesting to think about. Both of these films are interesting to think about after the fact. They might not be the most entertaining, like, sits to watch, but I don't think this film is devoid of meaning or a point. Like, I see it.
Right.
I can kind of, like, he's planting just enough so that things start percolating in your mind and you kind of get a amorphous sense of what he's trying to say. Although he is, as you said, not shouting it, he is whispering it, and you're like, oh, what do you say? And it has that feeling, like the stuff with Abdallah and like him not speaking a language, and he obviously being some sort of kind of like a character surrogate for Sissako himself.
Yes.
Returning to this town and feeling like an outsider. There's a lot of imagery there that after a while it starts to build something, like a portrait of something or a portrait of a feeling. It's not necessarily saying anything too in-depth or anything too intensely, but my main takeaway is that when he is leaving and climbing the sand dune near the end of the film,
Incredible shot.
Great.
what I find most interesting about it is his shoes, because he spent so much time looking at sandals, and my only thought was, my God, that's a lot of sand. That's a lot of sand going in your shoes and it's never coming out. I think just the choice of footwear is emblematic of not fitting in.
Yeah.
Like, he's wearing this Western style of dress and it is tangible and you can feel it and you can see it. And he is building this sense of alienation for Abdallah throughout the film. It's not something that's trying to hook you in or to like bash you over the head with that idea.
No. Yeah. And he does it in so many different ways as well. Like, another example of this is when his mother complains, oh, he's not wearing any traditional garb. It's not the shoes, but his clothes. The first scene that he decides to do it, I remember watching it, and he enters his uncle's house. And I'm like, oh, wow, these look so comfortable. They're so flowy. And then it cuts to him sitting inside his uncle's house, and his clothes, the material that is used for the clothes exactly matches the material that is on the couch, that is on the curtains, and covers the table. It's like a camouflage print. Nothing's working out for Abdallah.
But even though he has trouble fitting in everywhere he goes, those private moments of observation through the window when he dances along to the music festival at night privately,
Beautiful moment.
when he snuggles up to the woman who told him a story about a lost love with a Frenchman, these are all just different ways of engaging with where Abdallah is. And they land awkwardly, but they're still very emotional. I feel moved by those moments. Side note, since you mentioned the upholstery and the fabric matching Abdullah, this is also Sissako's funniest movie.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
There's a great moment when Mata is scolding Katra, and Mata's saying, you hid money from me. What are you doing? What would you be without me? And Katra pauses, and he has this adorable, guilty little look on his face, and he looks up and he says, an electrician? Incredible. Just a slam dunk.
Owned.
Another little beat that's so funny is when Mata is setting up electricity for Abdullah's mother. They're outside looking at the electrical lines, and she says, what's that? And then Mata says, it's all fine. And then it sparks and explodes. And Mata says, that is what we call an electrical accident. So good. Sissako comedy when?
Yes, when? Soon, hopefully.
The more I think about it, I feel like these films will all just be better served watched in a theater, because I felt extremely distracted watching both of these on my computer. And when I was rewatching Timbuktu at home as well on the television, I felt that the reason I enjoyed my first viewing of Timbuktu so much is because I watched that in the theater as well. Like, it's the kind of film that you need to be locked in a seat and you can't go anywhere. You can't pause the shit.
Yeah.
And then it can really sink in.
Yeah.
Like, your presence is as important as the film's presence.
Yeah.
You have to match that.
Sometimes quiet films like these are actually the most cinematic, because it's not about the screen, but the inability for you to control time.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Time.
I mean, that's what we imagine that films are supposed to be able to control, which is time. But with current kind of like media watching habits, that's no longer the case. But certain films and certain media needs you to relinquish that control for it to really work. And I think these are the kinds of films that need that.
They also really need a better restoration. I think the copies that we watched were 360p, which is extremely low quality.
Waiting for Happiness was a little bit better than Life on Earth.
It was watchable. Life on Earth was
rough.
Yeah.
If anyone is out there that is sitting on a print, or I just really hope that someone is taking the time to try to restore these early 2 films, because I'm watching these pixels on my screen and I'm like, wow, behind these pixels is probably such a gorgeous image.
Yeah.
I want to see that image, please.
At Graham Brown, please save us.
You're our only hope.
Are there, before we hop to Life on Earth, are there any other like vignettes from Waiting for Happiness that stuck out to you guys?
Yeah, the reason that Waiting for Happiness really like stands tall this time when I was like comparing the two, basically because I watched them back to back, I thought that Waiting for Happiness had some of the most beautiful imagery that I've ever seen. All the stuff with Katra, basically, like him walking the wire like through the desert, is a gorgeous shot. Him letting the light bulb float out and the light bulb floats itself back onto shore is another also like incredible moment. I love that little bit that Eli brought up when Abdullah's listening to this party that's going on somewhere near him. He starts dancing, and I just love how, like a lot of other Sissako movies, music sort of infiltrates everything and everyone in this town. And Abdullah's neighbor, who is this mother who's teaching her daughter how to, I think it's a mother and a daughter, I'm not sure, but it could have been an unexplained relationship like Mata and Katra.
Apprenticeship.
Yeah, an apprenticeship. And she's teaching her how to sing, and their songs sort of soundtrack quite a lot of the scenes of this movie. I think those are just really beautiful, simple moments, but it is a really clear showcase of what Sissako can deliver to us on a visual and audio picture imagery level.
It occurs to me that Sissako is great at making metaphors or microcosms of the main condition of the movie that is at hand, where each new vignette, like the light bulb being cast out into the ocean and floating back, mirrors something about Katra's experience, as when he tries to leave the town via train and is thrown off and ultimately has to return and adapt. I also realized that Waiting for Happiness is probably the movie of Sissako's that has the most direct optical POV shots. So there will be characters looking at something and then you'll see what they're looking at. In particular, this happens around a little kaleidoscope toy that starts off with one of the men on the beach and then winds up somehow in the hands of Katra and the girl who is the singer's apprentice. There is something metaphorical but a little inexplicable about those shots through that kaleidoscope, where there's something wonderful and tactile and mundane about looking through that toy at this town, this liminal port city where everyone seems to be either waiting or continuing on, or both.
What do y'all think of Kathra when he shoots out the street lamp?
That's badass.
That's an incredible sequence.
What do y'all make of that, like from a meaning standpoint? Because I was like, don't understand, but also make sense on a kind of emotional level, or like not thematic, but like a imagery level. It kind of made sense when it happened, and I am always amazed by films like this where it kind of operates on an invisible kind of wavelength that I don't understand. And like it kind of makes sense. It's almost like he was taking revenge against electricity, which I found kind of interesting. Like stuff like that is the kind of stuff that I just don't know what to make of this film, because like how much of it is design, how much of it is accidental, how much of it was found by just doing stuff like in the edit, I don't know.
Right.
Like I'm thinking about Makan and his friend who he takes a photo with, and like they talk. Like I kept mixing up people because I wasn't sure who he was talking to. Like, because he was just like be garbed and like you'll be seeing the back of the heads. But I was wondering whether he was looking at the body of his friend and then he was cutting to images of the pictures that they took together. But then turns out that the person who is on the shore is somebody else.
Well, so he says.
Yeah, but then later on he has a conversation with his friend. And all that stuff was actually extremely confusing, for me anyway. But there was like a certain wistfulness that still is coming across.
Yeah, it's confusing yet potent. I do think it is operating on some emotional wavelength that is still received even if it's not explicable or able to be articulated. In a way, Ben, it reminds me a little bit of Twin Peaks: The Return in a very different way, where I get it and I follow a thread, but I can't explain it. And I really love it when I can't really explain a movie and what it's doing to me.
Yeah.
I also have to mention the Chinese guy in this is really interesting.
Yes. I want to talk about the Chinese guy.
And the one karaoke scene.
Yeah. So before this guy shows up in this movie, Mata and Katran are talking about this light bulb that's not working. And Katran says this thing. He says this throwaway line. He says, "Oh, the broken light bulb, it must be from Taiwan." I clocked that and I was like, what's going on here? The first time I watched it, I was like, what's happening? And then like a few scenes later, this watch seller from China shows, or from he's this Asian Chinese diaspora watch seller shows up. And I'm like, Tai Ming Liang, what time is it there?
Oh,
Which is about a clock seller, a watch seller, and the disconnect. And I'm like, there's no way that this is not a direct reference to Tai Ming Liang and his filmography. Like, there's literally no way. He has not talked about it, but...
Okay, now is the time when I have to drop a fact about life on Earth.
Drop it.
Okay.
Drop a fact about life on
You
Earth.
guys are gonna flip. This is wild.
We're all gonna die.
After the French TV station Canal Plus bought Le Jeu, which was Sissako's thesis film that screened at Cannes, the French-German TV station Arte approached him about creating an installment of an upcoming series they were making about the turn of the millennium, as seen by 10 filmmakers from different countries, called 2000 Seen By. So Life on Earth is one of those movies, and one of the other 10 films was Tsai Ming-liang's The Hole. So I think you may be right that connection is on purpose.
Yeah.
Tsai Ming-liang is also all about alienation.
It's true. And I think there's a really, really strong link between the feel of both movies. It's hard to explain, but the feel is similar. I'm also glad that you brought up the watch seller, because that small contained story of him courting, singing karaoke, like bringing out to dinner in a Chinese restaurant this lady, you see a little bit of their romance, and that, as Sissako said in this documentary, is the genesis of his coming feature film, The Perfumed Hill. In the documentary, which was filmed a year before the pandemic happened, you see him traveling to Beijing and scouting locations and interviewing people for this upcoming film of his that he was slated to shoot in 2020. So it is very exciting, and I really like that small vignette with this guy and this lady. It was a great moment.
It's really wonderful, and he dedicates the song that he sings to his loved ones back home, and he talks about how he fears losing those close to him. It's very lonely, but vulnerable and heartfelt. And Sissako finds a lot to identify with in the experience of this watch seller.
I find the Psy connection really interesting because that is another filmmaker that I am not quite on the same wavelength of.
Rip.
But I don't know. I feel like these themes of alienation should speak to me somehow, but maybe I don't want the films I watch to reflect how I feel about the world around me.
Right.
I don't know.
You feeling alienated, Ben?
I think, Ben, it honestly might be like you're just not vibing with slow cinema.
I might. I don't know.
Even though this isn't textbook slow cinema, I think that the pacing of it and the like lack of dialogue in a lot of this movie is really reflective of that. And I think it is like Sissako on his most slow cinema side of himself in this movie.
I don't find that these are much slower than Bamako or Timbuktu, however. I think the pace is about the same, and they all kind of have very similar constructions.
They do.
Where you visit some characters here, and then you go on to a different set of characters.
It's true.
Move around.
And I guess maybe all of his movies are quite slow cinema-esque, because you have that also parallel editing between different narratives, which is a hallmark of the genre.
I can see the argument that he is slow cinema. In fact, I would say he is slow cinema just because of the lack of propulsive plot.
Vibe.
I want to just tune my brain so I can appreciate these things on a more fundamental level rather than an intellectual level. That is my wish for myself.
Inebriation.
Then I'll fall asleep. I should watch them asleep.
Should we move on to this debut feature?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Life on Earth from 1998.
Let's do it. Eli, I want to hear about the first time that you saw this movie, because I remember pretty distinctly that after you saw this movie, you texted us in our group and said that this was the deep cut that you're choosing.
Yeah.
I want to hear about why you felt very strongly about this movie on your first watch of it.
As we've discussed, I saw Timbuktu back when it was in theaters, when it first came out. Then Sissako had always kind of remained in the back of my head as a possible choice for us to talk about. Then I knew that I needed to watch more of his stuff, and it was impossible to find. And this stream of Life on Earth popped up through the African Film Festival, which is a great film festival. I got my ticket, I watched it, and I just knew. I think partially because of that travelogue sensibility that I really enjoy in movies, both making and watching, and also because it did feel like a key to understanding Sissako. I think, strangely, thinking about Timbuktu, it feels like a bit of an anomaly, even without having seen Sisako's other stuff, because it is so patient, and Life on Earth forefronts its patience. There is no plot or premise being put onto this observational style. It is purely just what it is.
Even less so than Waiting for Happiness, right?
Yeah.
Waiting for Happiness already has so little, and you could say Life on Earth has less.
I think it does. It is simpler.
Yeah.
Not simplistic, because there is actually a lot going on, I suppose, politically. There is that same interest in Aimé César's writing that has appeared in other movies of Sisako's, like Bamako. To me, the big takeaway is that as the world is obsessed with the turn of the millennium, here life continues. And here this surrogate for Sissako, as played by himself, is making a joyous return to his father's homeland and has a wordless, felt reconnection with his father and this place and the people around him, and just observes. Waiting for Happiness doesn't really have a main character. It is really just vignettes that hop around and are connected thematically. Life on Earth, even when the Sissako character is not in the scene, it feels like the camera is everything that he observes. And I really like the personality of the camera here and how it is cohered under this character's experience of returning home, being a part of it again, and is more successfully a part of the place than Abdullah is in Waiting for Happiness. I really enjoy that feeling. And the, again, patience. I know I'm using that word a lot, but it's all low-key, simple, observational, and calm.
Sisako's character in this film, the point of him returning to Sokolo is to film a movie, right?
Which is Life on Earth.
He says that in his opening letter to his dad. and that movie ended up being this movie. So it is extremely autobiographical in that sense. As a first feature, you really get a sense that you want to try to get the strongest thing off of your chest. Like, this is the one thing that I want to make. First of all, I think you can really tangibly feel the care and respect that Sissako has for his father.
Yes.
And for his father's hometown. Also, the love and the care that he has for the place.
Yes.
And the people surrounding the place. It's a joyous celebration of the space and the people there. And it's sort of like a look at us in a good way. I really appreciate it for its just calm joyousness.
Totally agreed. Yeah. That also reminds me of what Isabel Sandoval told us in our conversation with her, that first features are often this unpolished, clear look at what the filmmaker cares about most. Sissako cares about the people around him.
I think the vignette that struck me the most, or like the scene that is returned to a few times that I think about in this film, is the one where a bunch of men are hanging out, listening to the radio under the shade. And every time you return to them, the shade has moved, and it keeps moving up until a certain point when they all decide that this is too much sun, and then they all up and leave.
Yeah.
And I think that is the vibe of this film, of hanging out in the shade and then letting the world kind of literally revolve around the sun.
Yeah.
And how that changes your day. That is this film.
I like that a lot.
And I think how it attaches to the rest of the world, and I think how it makes sense as a companion piece to Bamako, if anything, is that Bamako is extremely dialogue or textually heavy film about Africa's place in the world and how it connects to the world and colonization. Here is kind of the wordless companion to that, where the world is having all this hubbub about the new millennium, and this small little town is just like chilling,
Yeah.
doing its thing.
Vibes.
And doesn't really care, and they're listening to it, but it doesn't necessarily affect them. They're kind of just doing the same thing, and the way that globalization and technology is making a very glacial impact on the town can be felt.
Yeah.
Like the photography studio is this ancient, I don't know what you call that kind of photography method. I don't know what you call that.
Looks like a 1920s camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a daguerreotype kind of deal. I don't know.
Yeah. And my favorite scene from that photography is when this guy's about to get photographed and he's telling the photographer about these automatic doors that open in front of you and close behind you. And the photographer is like, no way, that can't be real, man. And this guy's like, yeah, trust me, it's real. That was a really, really great moment.
I think the fact that this is made for this Millennium series is great, because then it dates this film to show you this town in relationship with the rest of the world when you think of the world in the new millennium.
Like a time capsule.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of how he is accessing his hometown, because he's obviously spent a lot of time abroad, and he thinks of his town as behind the times in a sense, in a kind of wistful way.
But it's not condescending.
Yeah, it's not.
Not at all.
It's like you guys said, it's a joyous kind of celebration of that kind of living.
Yeah. And I think another link to Bamako, now that you brought it up, Ben, I was thinking about how the radio sort of acts similarly to the speakers that broadcast the trial that's going on in Bamako to the rest of the village. And I also found a lot of similarities in how the people who are hearing this react in a way that is pretty non-reactive, basically. Yeah, I don't know exactly what to think of that in this film, but I think it is a very interesting link between the two.
Here's the thing that I find common across all of his films: radio, communication, kind of now old technology, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Timbuktu, the megaphone announcements from the terrorists, also similar to the radio broadcasting in Bamako and in Life on Earth.
Yeah.
And also the need to record and take photographs is also something that's present on all of his films.
Yeah.
I just see all these kind of thematic resonances between the films. I don't really know what to make of them or like what he's necessarily trying to say, but he does seem to have these little obsessions about how community and history is made within these towns.
Like, the only way that this works is because everyone lives so close together. Like, the community aspect of it is so important, because if you're not in that, like, physical proximity, you wouldn't be able to hear any of the broadcasts. Same with the music that sort of soundtracks these people's lives, because everyone is just so close to each other, you can hear everything. I don't have like anything definitive to say about it, but I think it is very beautiful, and I think it's just a great way to show everyone very close together.
I want to celebrate a particular sequence. The photographer is taking a photograph of a lady who asks if it's okay to smile, and she does. And then you hear the clipping of shears, and Sissako cuts to a mirror where you see the photograph being taken. Nana, the lady on the bicycle, goes past in the mirror. Sissako pans left with her movement, but she is no longer visible once she passes out of the mirror, and lands on the barber, the source of that shear cutting, trimming a young man's hair, and watching Nana go past. How creatively Sissako constructs the space in this shot and connects the people off screen and on to this space. There's such cleverness to this that when I think of the spirit of the movie and its celebratory, chill affect, I think of this shot. It's really remarkable to me.
I had to replay it a few times because I didn't understand how it was working, and I thought the shears was some sort of, the photographer was like pumping up the camera to take the photo. And I was like, oh, wait, what's happening here? No, it's shears. But I think this brings up a really great point, how interestingly and in some instances trying to obscure things from you, how Sissako constructs a space through shots. So I'm thinking about that courtyard, but I'm also thinking about whenever Sissako introduces a scene not in a wide shot where you see everything. And yeah, I've said this before, but I think the strongest contender of this is the courtyard in Waiting for Happiness. It took me ages to figure out whose side was which house, and the eye line matches. You have to really like calculate where everyone is based on how they're looking at each other and the direction that they're looking at each other. It is a very interesting way to construct space, and I think it is getting you to first focus on the minuscule, like the detail, and then zooming out later on to get the full picture is sort of a great allegory for how Sissako films operate as a whole.
That's great. It's also a very active viewing experience. You do have to pay a lot of attention and construct it in your mind, connect these vignettes.
It is. It really is.
Also, when people are on the phone in Life on Earth, which is frequently, there is a kind of connection of space where this thread about globalization that Ben's hitting on becomes very complicated. We don't cut to or see the other end of the phone call.
Yeah.
Similarly, the people on the phone often have trouble reaching the people who they are trying to call. So even though this technology has arrived, it doesn't necessarily aid in the most fruitful connections that the movie has. The more fruitful connections are the immediate ones where people are present in the space together.
You know, when they're having that phone call and the guy's helping them, there's also the postal worker in the post office that has his own phone, right?
Yes.
Are those two phones in the same place?
I think so.
Oh, I was going to say, I think not.
I thought not, but there is a scene late in the movie where both calls, like there is a call from the post office.
They're intercutting between both.
Yeah, they're intercutting in between both. But what tells me that they're in the same space, or maybe he's tricking us, is that the audio overlaps. So the audio from one call can be heard while you see the other call happening.
Right.
You're right.
If I remember correctly, I was very confused because I thought of them as very distinct spaces because he only has that one shot for each of these spaces.
Yes.
And then he has this scene where he intercuts people calling somewhere else with the post office guy receiving a call, but it's clear that the conversations do not match up and have nothing to do with each other. And I was like, what? At first I was thinking they were talking to each other, but then it made no sense. And then later on in the film, there's a moment where you're looking at the phone that people are using. And nobody is speaking, but off screen you hear the post office worker, I think, talking on the phone. And then I was like, wait a minute, is he just behind camera?
Yeah.
Are these two phones in the same place?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I understood that.
That's another example of him obscuring your understanding of a space with the lack of shots, but in a very intentional way, I think.
It also makes it really enjoyable to revisit these movies and discover more.
This is just the second watch, but I feel like my appreciation for both of these movies has grown so much already. I hope that we get more restored versions. So we'll be able to experience them in its full glory.
I hope so. Well, I often like to leave our little series on directors with a quotation, and we've been talking a lot about understanding and clarity here. So I'll finish off with one quotation here. Quote, "I believe that in the West you want to know everything. All must be given. I do not think that life is like that. We cannot hold back on translation, but it is necessary to deprive you of something. I do believe in that." End quote. When he says necessary, what do you guys think he means? It is necessary to deprive you of something.
I feel like it is an invitation to look closer. Because the films that I like where they obscure stuff, it's when they want me to lean in rather than being explicit. This might be unrelated, but I was thinking about how the title is kind of a pun because it's life on Earth, but it's also life on lowercase earth, because I was just thinking about the landscapes I was looking at and how it's different from the cityscapes and the escalator that he begins on in the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
Like that's a very different kind of earth from the earth that they're literally standing on.
Yeah.
I feel like most of his films are comedies more than anything.
Ben's take for every movie is it's secretly a comedy.
I think he goes in on these places with a comic sensibility rather than anything else. Because, I mean, look at Timbuktu. Timbuktu is really funny for the kind of subject matter that it has.
Up to a point.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a comedy, but it's
quite light. It's light.
It's a comic sensibility.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
He is open to both the joys and tragedies of life. Is that too cornball?
Sorry, I was just thinking about Romero's take on Nazi Germany. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
What?
Is that a real movie?
No, I was just thinking about light directors making movies on heavy subjects. Sorry, cut that out. Cut that out. Cut it out. Cut it out.
Is there anything else that we want to pack in?
Yo, but if Criterion, you are hearing this is your job to release a box set of these 4 films.
Do it.
In 4K.
Plus probably the 2 other shorts that he's made in 4K. We need that restoration stat. And I know you have your eyes on him because Bamako's on the Criterion channel, but that's not enough.
I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for bringing these films to my attention, guys, because I feel like I would never watch them otherwise.
Yeah, thank you, Eli, for taking the leap.
Thank you for guzzling his filmography, Wilson. I feel like I had necessary help in breaking down what Sissako is about.
Yeah, I just find his films so fascinating and also such a joy to talk about. If you're listening and you haven't seen a Sissako movie, check them out. You can reach out to me on Discord if you cannot find a download link for these movies. I will personally find you a download link.
By hook or by crook?
This is not me doing illegal stuff. It's not illegal. It's not illegal. Sorry.
It's not illegal. It's not illegal. Don't sue us. Don't sue us.
Maybe rephrase that in such a way that it doesn't sound illegal. Like, I don't know, say something like...
If you want access to some of his films, you can...
If you need help finding these films, just say finding.
For yourself, of your own volition, without criminal accomplice from us.
Exactly. If you need help finding these films in a completely legal manner, you can join our Discord server and send the bat signal, and we will be at your service.
But you do know Bamako's on the Criterion channel, so there's that.
Yes.
Right. And Timbuktu is readily available to rent.
Yes.
And actually, there are some of his movies just up on YouTube.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Worth giving it a shot.
Hopefully, we will all see each other again in our deep cup upkeep on the Perfume Till. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Please, Danny Glover, give him the money to make this one.
Quickly. Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. Please tell a friend if you enjoy the show because that gets out the word what's the best way to say it? I do think that we should start like plugging word of mouth, basically. If you
enjoyed this episode, tell a friend.
I dare you to tell a friend.
If you enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend. Word of mouth is the best.
Your need to say the phrase "word of mouth" in this is hilarious. You don't need to say "word of mouth."
Blood vessels popping in my forehead. I have to say "word of mouth."
If you enjoyed this episode, tell a friend.
Word of mouth. That's it.
I feel like it needs something else. It needs something else to clinch it.
Yeah, like why? If you enjoyed this episode, tell a friend.
Word of mouth is this show's lifeblood.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you to Justina Yam for our beautiful artwork. For real, though.
I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
Next time.
Next time.